Okay, now for this one, we're going to go on Trump's promises on the budget. Now, on the budget, it's a little bit different because he's been a little bit, he has a little bit of different ideas on what he would want. Now, when it comes down to the budget, is he's made a lot of promises of what he'll do and what he promises that of what he would make on the things with it that he would make happen, and we need to go over that. Now, first of all, he said he would cut the actual he would actually cut the debt. Now, if we actually look at it and break it down, we actually find that he's actually spent more money per year than Barack Obama. And yet he complained about Barack Obama's excessive spending. Now, this should be very concerning to everyone, because if we're going to look at compare him with Barack Obama's spending, we should be looking at him and stating that he should not be actually making these statements if he's not going to keep up with them. Another thing is he's made statements early on in his presidency that he was just going to sign just one continuing resolution to keep the government running, and basically he was never going to sign another one like that. That was adding so much debt to the to the uh, to the already massive debt we already currently have. Now the problem being is he's done this continually since then, and when we're looking at with it, I mean, we've seen that he's basically thrown out this idea of cutting spending. His excuse is, oh, we had to build up the military. Now, when we look at the actual idea of the military first, let's look at this. The military is not exactly something that was needing building up. The military, in fact, it was, we look under Obama, we actually found that the military actually had extended amounts of money being added to it, even well more, even percentage wise, well more than George W. Bush. And the reason why it was actually has actually had issues is, number one is the actual way that they were spending money. Number one, there was much more waste as it grew. That's number one. And number two is it was actually the issue of the actual agenda and what they were actually doing and where they were. Now, if we start to look at those things, that'll actually change how people actually feel about their about how the military was actually doing things, and you'll actually realize that the military is actually not the problem of the of it's not the military budget, but rather the military objective. And people try to state that the military, oh, we need to spend more money. Well, no, we don't need to spend more money. We need to actually cut the money and actually cut the objective. Because if we look where we are with it, we're in well more than we have. We're in actually current military action in well more than 50 countries. We are in total placement of military in well more than 100 countries. And this should be very, very troubling, because if we're having people in that many countries, well, what are we doing? I mean, why should we have that much military engagement if nothing is going on? And if we're and why should we spend $750 billion? And it's probably higher now. We're probably going to be closer now to $1 trillion if we're actually doing nothing worthwhile, if we're just basically putting people in harm's way. And this is something, and this is something that, I mean, when we look even under George W. Bush, I mean, he was spending, I mean, I believe the max was like around like $400,000. I mean, and that really was not that long ago. And he was really the most active in what we would validate for wars. I mean, and he was really actively fighting this war. He was the one who started the war on terror. And that was about the highest it got. Obama added roughly about 20%, added between 20 to 30% onto that. Obama got into the 600s briefly, dropped it down to into the 500s with it when we started to de-escalate in a couple areas, but it really was not really much of a de-escalation. But and this is where people started to freak out. Oh my God, he's it was actually a slight reduction, and it was they were talking, and it was like for like 1 year, and then they went right back up, and that they were saying Obama's dismantling the military. Well, he wasn't really. It's just it was basically like I think equal like 50 billion in a year, and it was for like 1 year, and it's like they're talking like he's dismantling the military. Well, no, because if you look compared to like Bush, I mean, he had added basically like 200 billion to the actual total amount. His problem is that he added another 4 wars onto what Bush was already currently fighting 4 active wars. And when you do that, and in addition to these other little minor police actions around the globe, what we always tend to fight, but never tends to make the news. Now, when we look at with this current stuff under Trump, is we're continuing to do these little police actions. We're continuing to arm other countries in which are causing famines and stuff, but we have not actually reduced anything. We've actually spent more money and not actually reduced our footprint. We sent maybe a small amount home, not many, and yet we're still doing the same action. And this is the whole thing: is we're still actually there. And this is where uh, budget wise, where it's going to cost a lot of money. And you could basically, just by merely having a constitutional defense, not offense, but defense, basically defending the United States and its territories only, and you could reduce that thing down to by 2/3 to an actual third of what we have currently, about 250 billion, and you could actually save a lot of money. Now, this would be even below Bush levels of spending. This would be back down to like last time we had that amount would be under Bill Clinton. And the reason why is because we wouldn't need any of that money. It would be involving getting out of NATO, uh, and we wouldn't involve ourselves with any of that. It would be getting completely out of the Middle East, sending everything home with it. Because when you have personnel overseas, they're actually making more money just for being overseas, regardless if there's conflict or not. You actually have to pay them more money, regardless of what level they are. And when you start paying them more money, that costs a lot more in your budget, if they're in harm's way or not. I mean, basically, you could station people in like France where there's nothing going on, and you're paying them more money just for them being away from home. Now, if you put them in, like, let's say South Carolina, for instance, you would be paying them basically a small. You'd be paying them a hell of a lot less. It'd be a fraction, basically many times half of what you're paying them overseas, and you would basically, for that amount of money, is you'd be saving a lot. Now, mind you, most of the time they'd be doing the same. They would actually be doing the same thing. And what it would do is it would raise our actual security here at home. Because what makes our nation able to be attacked by terrorism is it basically is since we have all of our military members overseas, we have nothing here to defend ourselves, and it leaves our country actually vulnerable, and that's an actual problem. Now, this is something on our budget with it. When we look at our budget as well, we can actually let funding expire and let there's contingency funds in between for workers. And then what you do is you let funding, as I've talked before, you let funding expire, and then we can do this thing with public aid as well. If you're not, because if you're not an able-bodied person, you can let that funding go away. Now, eventually, you will realize that you could pretty much get rid of half of the budget. Half of the budget will go away if you do this. Basically, you will be left pretty much with pretty much nothing but your what's constitutional, probably Social Security, um, anything for the disabled, and that probably will not go away. And you'll probably be left with your military spending, which will be far less, and you'll be left with obviously just basically your bare bones things. Other departments are probably going to be eliminated that are not necessary. They'll probably be relegated down to the states. And what's going to happen is you're going to have to send a lot more money back and to the people and the tax rates are going to plummet, as well as you're going to be paying down the debt. I mean, just even with it, if you kept up with those amounts, I mean, debt would be paid off within like 5 years at most. Because the fact is even at the current rates, I mean, you could pay off debt very, very fast because there's a lot of wasted money currently right now. I mean, you're talking you'd be taking off trillions of dollars. You'd be taking that right off, and then what you would be doing is after that, you could then after you take up all the debt, then those debt payments are going to eliminate, and all that could then be reduced down as well, and that could be then returned. Now, since we keep adding on with it, we could we've gotten ourselves into a lot of trouble. And when we see that Trump has added, we're talking currently it's over 26.6 trillion, getting closer to that 26.7 trillion amount. Uh, and we're talking that's very, very damaging for the economy. And that's really, it's not very good. And when we start to look at this, we can see that they've basically gone through so much with this. And I mean, currently, basically, is just showing you right now is at the current rates. I mean, we're looking at about going just to 2024 is basically this would be if Trump won. We're talking about 46 trillion. We're talking just off $46 trillion. So as much as we're talking that Trump wants to say like he's great, well, not so much. because we're right now at 136.64% of debt to GDP ratio, and that'll push us basically, if he wins again, it'll push us well over 174% of debt to GDP ratio. We're talking, this is not sustainable by any measure. This is just insane. I mean, when we're talking about the budget, this is not even sustainable. And frankly, it doesn't matter because Biden's just as bad. But the fact is we can we can't sustain any of this stuff, and we have a president that believes that he can essentially take all of his money and take all his money and just spend it as he wants. He's spending much worse than Obama, and it just gets worse. And the way I see it with it is maybe if we get an actual Democrat president with the House of Representatives flipping back over to Republican, maybe they'll actually grow a spine in those houses and they'll block extra spending and only allow certain spending to go through. Because frankly, is we can't sustain this at all. This is too much damn money. Currently we're almost at 700 billion alone right now on war. I mean, you got to think with it. We're going to go over that 750, which was supposed to be the budgeted allotment. I mean, because we're what right now? We're end of August. We're talking at that rate, we should be about 1.1 trillion dollars. That's insane. That is completely irresponsible. And this is basically what we're dealing with when it comes down to the budget. When it comes down to this year on interest alone, we're almost at $340 billion. This is what happens when you keep adding up with it. This is just interest alone. And if you look at our interest rate, uh, you can actually see that our interest rate is far below what it actually should be, and this is only because we have them keeping the interest rate ultra low. Now, if the interest rate were actually equal to the inflation rate, like it would be, we're talking that the current interest, we're talking that the interest should be far into the trillions. We're talking at least $2 trillion in interest alone, which means we could not financially afford it. If the interest was actually normalized to what the actual real inflation rate was, we could not financially afford it. And this should be a real clue of what we're dealing with right now. And this is showing, and when people are saying, oh, our economy is going to recover and all this other stuff, no, our economy is in serious trouble right now. And this is something that when we look at these budgets, we can actually see this. We can actually see how much trouble we're in. When you get over 100% on your debt to GDP ratio, you're in some serious trouble. You're putting a serious burden on the economy because everything is sliding toward basically sustaining the government. And that's all you're doing now. And that's all you're working on, sustaining the damn government. If you look at what it calls workforce, they're trying to basically state that the workforce is what it called compared to To look in comparison to 2000, our workforce is still down 15 million. This is compared to the last 20 years when he's trying to tout that. Um, they're trying to tout only 16 million unemployed when it's really about over 26 million unemployed. I mean, compared to 2000 with it, we had about 80 million workers not in the labor force when now it's over 100 million workers. The median income with it has was about 30,000 back then. It's only gone up to 34,000, and when you start to add in all of the inflation that we've had over the years, you can see something's happened with it. We're losing ground. And this is uh, this is something in which we need to understand that this is not something good, and it's basically it's and when it comes down to U.S. population, only about 1/3 of us uh, would be labeled as U.S. taxpayers, uh, which is only which is uh, going to sustain it only to a certain level. And you can see that basically is that some things that kind of show that what it called that are that even when it comes to the dollar, that this should show you what's happening to the actual currency. The dollar to silver ratio right now is 4,059 per ounce. Uh, the dollar to silver ratio in 1913 was $2.65 per ounce. This should show you we're losing big time. The dollar to gold ratio in 1913 was 28.96 per ounce, which is roughly not too far off from the Bretton Woods Agreement. Now it's 30,817 per ounce. And those should be the amounts that we should expect somewhere near of where they should be going to. Because right now they're kind of being patted down. And right now with it we're talking is because they just keep if we're and when we look at the actual money supply with it, we can actually see that the money supply keeps going up with it. Money supply right now is we're talking over 4 times the amount, yet it just doesn't equal out to the outcome. And this means that there's a massive inflation. I mean, there's basically it's over 4 times the amount. It's about we're talking it's about 450% inflation over that time, just in money supply alone. That's just basic, and we're this is why we should be very very wary of the actual economy as we see it. And when we talk about the budget, is we can see that he's not actually reducing costs. He's never reduced costs. He's actually added them up, and there is no recovery coming. In fact, this will actually cause less tax payments coming into the government, and that means any of these extra amounts of dollars that people have with it, they're never going to come out. And we have massive unfunded liabilities. We can see unfunded liabilities at over 154 trillion dollars, and it just doesn't work out well for Trump. Now, I'm not saying Biden's any better with it, but this leaves a huge opening for him with it because he can state that Trump has not handled anything well. And by blocking immigrants, he can claim that Trump is actually hurting the growth of the economy, which would be a true statement. Because when you add immigrants in there, they're going to help grow the economy, and it's going to lessen the burden of debt. And especially when you need to pay for more and more retired workers, well, that's what it's going to do, because they're going to add in there, and it's going to help bring up the number of people. They also create their own businesses as well, which helps hire more people, which is going to solve this issue. Now, what Trump has done is Trump has blocked these people from coming in, citing, "Oh, but we need these workers to get back to work." Well, the reason why they're not getting back to work is because you keep handing out free money, and when you do that, which is more part of the debt problem. It makes things worse. I'm basically going to cut it here, and I'll probably do another one probably later today. Yesterday was not feeling the best later on with it, so that's why I couldn't do one then. But that's about it, and see you guys later.